If Penn State wants to get a defensive tackle, maybe even another wide receiver, they're going to have to go through some obstacles in this spring transfer portal window.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are locked on to Penn State football, and thank you so much for making Locked On Nittany Lions your first listen and watch every single day, the number one Penn State sports podcast out there. My name is Zach Seyko, and I'm your host of the show. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. We're going to get into the spring transfer portal window here and why it's not going to be too kind to Penn State. But we're also going to talk about in this show, will Penn State be able to keep two quarterbacks in this class of 2026 now that Peyton Falzone is committed? And which Nittany Lion players will become stars, will go from good to great this upcoming season? We're starting with the spring transfer portal window. Of course, as always, let me know your thoughts down in the comment section. If you got a question, happy to address it in a future podcast. The spring transfer portal window is not going to be good to Penn State because they still haven't met that roster limitation. Penn State is well over how many players it can have. So it means that they're going to have more outgoing players than incoming. Right now, they sit at 119. Depending on when you're watching or listening to this episode, that number could very well change very soon. But based on JB Nelson going into the transfer portal, we talked about him in the latest episode before this one, that he was leaving. But even still, Penn State is at 119. They need to essentially cut 14 players to get to 105. And then if you're going to want to get players from the transfer portal, you're going to have to cut even more so that you can go out and recruit, because then, okay, you get to 105 with players that are departing, that are outgoing. Well, then that doesn't leave any room for incoming players as well. So if Penn State wants to go and get defensive tackles, if they don't feel that Alonzo Ford and Zane Durant, and I know we've had positive intel about Xavier Gilliam, if they don't think that's enough, they're not going to be able to go into the transfer portal because they're at that 105 limit. So Penn State needs to make a decision. Are they content with just the 14 players that they're ultimately, again, going to have to cut in order to bolster the roster in other ways? Or are they just going to stay pat there? Bottom line is Penn State's going to see more turnover in this, and it might be some players that you least expect. Most likely it's going to be a lot of the walk-on players, the run-on players, as Penn State has dubbed them. But we could be surprised. I think Smith Vilbert and JB Nelson fall into this category of Power 4 starters somewhere else that could play, maximize your NIL value while you have eligibility left. That's why Nelson and Smith Vilbert ultimately went into the transfer portal, because they didn't just want to be rotational players at Penn State. So Penn State is fortunately able to offset those losses at defensive end, at offensive line. But if you have any natural attrition here with roster limitations, Penn State, this could go from, okay, maybe things aren't as bad to, yeah, this is bad. This is an issue if Penn State isn't able to recover. So it depends on ultimately who enters the transfer portal. Look at position groups that are really, really maxed out there of players, or players that have 1 year of eligibility left that could go, like I said, maximize their final year of college football. Ultimately, I don't see any star players, any key contributors for Penn State, because, may I remind everybody, this is a national title contending team. Do I think they need help at defensive tackle? Yes. Everybody agrees that they could use maybe another wide receiver. There's debate about linebacker. I want to explain that in just a moment here, all three of those position groups. But Penn State's still a national title contender, even with some of those needs. Even if we can't agree on all of them, Penn State's still a top 5 team in the country right now. So what I'm getting at is that most of those key contributors will want to stick around because they're going to be playing for potentially a national title, at the very minimum college football playoff appearance. They're going to get back into the college football playoff. I can all but guarantee that. Let's talk about these position groups of need. And it's more than just, well, they need to get to the roster limitation. Defensive tackle, wide receiver, those are premium positions. I know that quarterback, everybody looks to quarterback here, but defensive tackle and wide receiver cost quite a bit of money if you want to get a solid contributor. What Penn State was targeting in the winter transfer portal window, that they were going after defensive tackle. Now, wide receiver, they did get Kyron Hudson. They did get Devontae Ross. And I'm going to have a surprise player in this list of players that will go from good to great later on in the show. So stay tuned for that. Defensive tackle, wide receiver, they command a hefty NIL price tag. But with what Penn State's going after, what Penn State wants, what Penn State needs, a co-starter to go alongside of Zane Durant, Alonzo Ford, they do not have a lot of proven depth at defensive tackle right now. So it would certainly be worth it to go get maybe another defensive tackle simply for the depth, but then you're pushing somebody out. And I don't know that it's worth it. It's not about the depth. Penn State has plenty of defensive tackles. I think this will be a position of strength in a year's time. But we're talking about 2025. We're talking about a potential national title appearance now, not a year from now, not 2 years from now. They need to address defensive tackle now. A wide receiver, they did a lot of the heavy lifting in the winter transfer portal window. They got Kyron Hudson. They got Devontae Ross. Those are two solid additions. You have more veterans in Caden Saunders. You have Liam Clifford. All those younger wide receivers that are teetering on more or less of a breakout. I like Kobe Howard. I like Tyser Denmark. Those players, this is a wide receiver room that I am not overly concerned about. I actually like where it stands because of the potential of the younger players and this core of veterans that you have, and the pressure's not on them. It would be, I've said this before, I'll say it again, it would be amazing for Penn State to get a superstar wide receiver. They don't need one because they rely on Nicholas Singleton, Katron Allen. You have a top three conservatively offensive line in the country. Yes, that I will stand on that. This offensive line is elite from the starters to the depth itself. So Penn State is really where it is at this point in the spring transfer portal window. Also, something to point out is that the spring transfer portal window doesn't really have a lot of big name players go into it. That's the winter portal window. And why that is has to do with timing. It has to do with timing because you want to get in with your new program. You want to build chemistry. You want to build relationships. You want to make a name for yourself, and going through winter workouts, going through spring football practice, that's a big deal. And it's why getting Kyron Hudson, Devontae Ross in the winter portal window is much more significant than it would be in the spring transfer portal window. To address linebacker, however, between defensive tackle and wide receiver, those can definitely be positions of need for Penn State. Linebacker, I don't think it is. I think Penn State is perfectly fine at linebacker unless they were to lose people, which again, I am not under any indication that they are. But when they run a 4-2-5, and the big strengths of this defense is the secondary, which is why they're running a 4-2-5, because they have so many defensive backs that are capable. But at linebacker, you get Keon Wiley back from injury. I think that's a player that can break out this season. Dom DeLuca is a quality veteran. Tony Rojas is somebody we're going to talk about quite a bit in the upcoming segment here, so stay tuned for that. But those three as your rotational starters in the 4-2-5, and then the backups. LeVar Arrington II comes in. But on top of that, Anthony Specca, guys like Kari Jackson, who are now back from injury. That's what Penn State's issue was with the linebacker position, were injuries. Even Tony Rojas last season played through an injury. So any criticisms that you have, he wasn't playing at 100%. The linebacker room is as strong as it's been. Keon Wiley was another one of those injured players. Linebacker is not a concern of mine. This is actually a group that I think will surprise people going into next season. But just to give everybody some realistic expectations for the spring transfer portal window, it's not going to be too kind for Penn State. It's just the nature of the winter versus the spring portal window. It's where Penn State is in terms of making its roster limitations. They're at 119. They knew this going in. They knew this, okay? They knew what was going to happen, what plans they would have to make. But if they want to make any additions, they're going to have to go through some subtractions and some more subtractions and then some to get under that total so that they can go out and recruit. But it's going to come at a price. So we'll see how Penn State approaches it. But realistically speaking, the spring transfer portal window is not going to do Penn State any favors. This is the team that they have. And I do, you say it passively. This is a national title contending team. This is the team that they have. Can they go out and get stronger? Absolutely. But there might not even be a player in the portal that necessarily does make them stronger at the end of the day. This is a national title contending team, and they're going to play it as such in the 2025 season. And going off of that, let's talk about some of those players that are going to go from good to great that could potentially go into star status, that could become superstars, the faces of this team. We're going to discuss some of those from defense to offense coming up next here on Locked On Nittany Lions. And today's show is brought to you by Gametime. There's nothing like the atmosphere of an NBA playoff game. Every bucket, every defensive stop, every moment feels huge. It's electric in the arena, and with Gametime, you can be part of it without the issue of last-minute ticket hunting. Gametime makes it fast and easy to get playoff tickets, even when demand is sky high. Prices on the app actually go down as tip-off gets closer, and their last-minute deals can save you up to 60%. Here's why you'll love using Gametime. You'll have last-minute deals. You can save up to 60%, as I've mentioned, off buying last-minute tickets for not only sporting events, but concerts, comedy, theater, you name it. And the all-in pricing means there's no surprise fees at checkout. So what you see is what you pay for. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account. Use promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account. Redeem code LOCKEDONCollege. Again, that is LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. So we're talking breakout players here, but ones that have already broken out that have the potential to go from good to great. So it's about more than just making a name for yourself. It is becoming the face of the team. I think the obvious ones, and I want to start on defense here. Zane Durant and Dani Dennis-Sutton, the two of them together, because I think both of these players can be all conference. I definitely think they have the potential to be all-American. Dani Dennis-Sutton, he's a former 5-star recruit. So that means that you have first-round NFL draft potential. What those star rankings mean, they are based on, a 5-star is based on 1 through 32 because they're supposed to simulate, they're supposed to project a future NFL draft. And Dani Dennis-Sutton, meaning that he had that 5-star recruiting ranking, means that he can live up to that potential of being a first-round NFL draft pick. He certainly has the build. He came on strong throughout the playoff run, and that's a lot of what we're going to be going off here is that these players started to hit their stride late in the season or just really had it going a season ago and can capitalize on it for this upcoming game, or this upcoming season, I should say. Zane Durant is another one. Zane Durant has been good really since the start of his campaign at Penn State because he flashed at spring football when he was a true freshman. They never redshirted him. He was somebody that was a key contributor as a sophomore and then was graded earlier in the season. I guess he teetered off a little bit because he didn't live up to being the best defensive tackle in all of college football, but that's what Pro Football Focus had him graded as last season early on. So Zane Durant, if he stays healthy, plays a full schedule, that's why depth is so important at defensive tackle. You really want to see Zane Durant take that next step, but he comes back for another season. This is a guy that was, frankly, in my mind, elite a season ago as a true junior. Now he comes back as a true senior. I don't know how he added strength. He looks like he looks like he's bulked up even further, which is crazy to think just seeing him at spring practice. But those two in tandem together, Durant and Dani Dennis-Sutton, I think if they stay healthy all season long, become the faces of the defense. Tony Rojas, mentioned him in the previous segment. Rojas, if and when he is healthy, this is the guy that's going to take that next step at linebacker. I think he and Keon Wiley form a nice dynamic duo, and it's not to be disrespectful to Dom DeLuca, but both of these players are, and frankly, all three of them are, because we've seen Dom DeLuca have his fair share of pick sixes. All three of those guys are 3-down linebackers. Tony Rojas, question marks about his tackling. He was dealing with an upper body injury. So if he's able to heal through that, work through that, he has the athleticism. He's a former, two-way athlete when it came to football. He was both a running back and a linebacker. So he just sees the field differently. I like what Rojas has in store for this upcoming season. And then in the back end of the defense, A.J. Harris, Zach Wheatley. Zach Wheatley very well could be a top 5. I think that's conservative. Top 5 safety going into next year's draft. Maybe even top 3. There's the likes of a Caleb Downs that's certainly probably going to be the number 1 safety in the 2026 NFL draft. But A.J. Harris, too, at cornerback. A.J. Harris has looked great in spring practice when we've seen him. He has lockdown cornerback written all over him. This battle for the cornerback spots, Elliott Washington and AC Collins, Adavian Collins for this upcoming season, that's the battle at CB2. AJ Harris has CB1 locked down. In man coverage and zone coverage, I think he can do it all. He's also aggressive in run defense. This is somebody that has first-round talent written all over him. I don't know how he isn't, as long as he stays healthy, right? I got to preface that every time. AJ Harris can certainly be one of the first cornerbacks off the board in next year's draft. And it just goes back to the secondary. My comments about the secondary, how this group, running back has a case, offensive line has a case, secondary has a case. The defensive backs could be the best position group on this team. It's the depth, but it's the star power up top with the likes of AJ Harris and Zach Wheatley. Zach Wheatley's got the same thing, and just a complete skill set. Taller safety as well. Remember his ball skills, the way that he's able to make plays. If you put him on the boundary, it could work for Wheatley. If you put him, they're going to put him over the top in center field. But Wheatley's biggest question marks around his game were, how does he handle run defense? Okay, that's great that he's a great pass defender, but what about his tenacity and run defense? And Wheatley certainly stepped up, and he was one of the best players from the college football playoff. He was nominated for the all college football playoff team as one of the starting safeties, right, that was recognized. So Wheatley will certainly look to capitalize on that finish last season. Offense, another obvious one. I think Drew Aller still has room to grow, as he should. Most people are going to say that Aller's not that good or that he's overrated, whatever have you. Aller was good last season. He was good, but he certainly had his shortcomings. Can he be better? Absolutely. Yes, he can, because you don't make those. A better player doesn't make those mistakes against Notre Dame. A better player doesn't make some of those interceptions in crunch time. Okay. Aller can certainly take that step forward, but you already started to see the potential. Made some phenomenal plays against USC, made some phenomenal plays against Oregon, but against Ohio State, against Notre Dame, pretty lackluster performances. I will say this, outside of the Notre Dame game, Aller has never really lost Penn State a game. He's kept them in it throughout. He plays mistake-free football. But I need to see more of USC and Oregon, where even though they didn't win the Big Ten championship, Aller certainly helped put the offense on his back and willed them to stay in that game. That was on the defense. Defense allowed 45 points in that game. Don't think that was Drew Aller's fault, even with the interceptions. Defense, if you just held Oregon to one less touchdown, you might have had a different outcome there. Now he's going to be throwing to a couple of players in the offense that I think can go from good to great here. And one of them, maybe these are lofty expectations here, Luke Reynolds at tight end. Tyler Warren's leaving. Khalil Dinkins is certainly going to be a factor in the offense, but Luke Reynolds wasn't a former 5-star by accident. This guy, I think, can be a game changer for Penn State. Now he's been missing some spring football practices, so hopefully that isn't too concerning here. I like what Luke Reynolds has to offer as a tight end. I think he'll have, a neutral start, but as the season progresses, that's where it's those weeks 8 through 12, later on in the season, going into the college football playoff, where you're going to see Luke Reynolds ascend and be a star contributor in Penn State's offense. I also want to throw out Devontae Ross. That's what I was alluding to in the first segment. Devontae Ross, the speed is game-changing. It's also the veteran playmaking ability. I know he comes from Troy. I know that's a group of 5 school, but had a good performance against Iowa. Iowa's known for its really good secondaries. Ross's speed is the difference maker here. You couple that with Andy Kotelnicki's creativity, Ross, I think, will be the leading receiver at the end of the season. I think that's very fair to say here. And I know Kyron Hudson, I just mentioned Luke Reynolds here, but Devontae Ross is going to have that big play threat, make the big, and when you have Drew Aller that can make that throw, has that arm strength to complete those passes for 70, 80 yards, Devontae Ross is going to be wide open down the field. And it's going to be in combination of his personal skill set, but it's just the release off the line of scrimmage. Penn State's secondary is good, and he's able to create separation against guys like now Elliott Washington and AC Collins and other AJ Harris certainly win their reps, but it's intriguing to see Devontae Ross with that quick first step create some separation right off the line of scrimmage. I think that's going to go a long way this season. And he's not as undersized as people think. He has added the weight here through winter workouts. Looks the part of a Big Ten wide receiver here. I am very excited for Devontae Ross. Last player I want to mention in this segment, Anthony Donkoh. Anthony Donkoh is dealing with a long-term injury, but if he comes back from and he's fully healthy here, this was a guy that was starting to become a star right tackle for Penn State. He really exploded onto the scene his redshirt freshman season, and Donkoh really was somebody that was underrated. Donkoh was beginning to put it all together, and then he got hurt. And fortunately, Nolan Rucci was able to step up in that place. And Nolan Rucci can certainly get better. But I think a player that goes from good to great here is certainly Anthony Donkoh. It's not going to be early in the season. It's going to be similar to Luke Reynolds, where he's probably going to have to recover that strength, get back up to game speed. Late in the season, if he's available, Anthony Donkoh becomes one of those star offensive linemen for Penn State. Not just good. We're talking about great here. That's Anthony Donkoh, who has an NFL, who certainly has a future in the NFL. Now let's revisit recruiting, because Peyton Falzone is a slam dunk commitment. Second quarterback in this class of 2026. It's tough to do. So will Penn State be able to do it? Keep both Troy Hune and Peyton Falzone happy? We'll discuss that on the other side of this break. Today's show is brought to you by Monarch Money. You ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it is easy to lose track. Now that's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just another budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all of your accounts, investments, spending in one place. So you stop just managing your money and you start building wealth. You'll get surprising insights from Monarch Money. When I started using Monarch for myself, I realized just how much I was spending on groceries or dining out, package deliveries. Now I can budget smarter and save more. You'll get all-in-one convenience. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track your spending, and even plan long-term goals. And you'll get easy collaboration. Managing money with your partner is smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for, get this, 50% off your first year. That is right, 50% off your first year. That is monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year. Two quarterbacks in any recruiting class is going to be difficult to manage, especially with Troy Hune and Peyton Falzone. These guys have a lot of potential. Now, I will be transparent and admit that I like Peyton Falzone as a quarterback prospect more than I do Troy Hune. And that's saying something, because Troy Hune was a consensus top 15 QB prospect, and Falzone had his concerns early on. Maybe he's a future tight end. He decommitted from Virginia Tech. He was drawing interest from Utah, from Iowa. How good of a quarterback prospect would he be? Is he going to be a project? Well, he continues to rise up the rankings quietly. He is trending in the right direction. He's only going to continue upwards. I think this is a player. Falzone might end up being a 5-star at the end of the day. I'm not predicting it. I'm just saying it's on the table. I don't know that Troy Hune holds that similar potential at this point in time. Both of them are 4 stars, but it's the ceiling that Falzone possesses, the athleticism. I think Troy Hune's a little, now Troy Hune can move, but he's more of your typical pocket passer. For someone who's 6'5", 200 pounds, and is only going to get bigger, faster, stronger, Peyton Falzone can move. And with that being said, can Penn State manage both of them? Can they keep both quarterbacks in the class of 2026? Yes, they can. Will they? I'll say this, because we are in the age of the transfer portal, NIL, and also Troy Hune's from the other side of the country. He's in California. Don't be shocked if Hune happens to decommit. Let me give the case for why you could be confident that Penn State would keep both of the quarterbacks in the class of 2026. Drew Allar's moving on. There's a starting quarterback position that's going to open up for the 2026 season. If Peyton Falzone and Troy Hune are as good as they say they are, then they should be able to enroll early and compete. Don't think that everything's just, yes, the natural order of things is going to be that it goes from Drew Allar to, look, don't discount Jackson Smolik at the end of the day. That's all I'm going to say, is that I think Smolik is extremely underrated here, which is why there is a QB2 battle. So don't just overlook Smolik. But most people are going to say that Drew Allar is going to pass the baton to Ethan Grunkemeyer. And then what happens? In this age of the transfer portal, so I talk about it as a double whammy. You also have the bad, you have the bad with the portal, but you have the good with it too, in some sort of sense. Let me explain. Is that Hune can start. That's what Penn State is doing. Penn State is saying, come here, develop with us. And then if you win, if you are good enough to win the position battles, great. You're on this Penn State team and you're a key contributor. If not, hey, you started with your career with us. We developed you and got you on the right track, but maybe your final destination isn't here. You can go to somewhere else and you can transfer out and there's no issues. So Penn State very well could keep 2 QBs in the class of 2026. If Troy Hune's bought in, and certainly someone from California, somebody from the state of California is bought into Penn State and committed as early as he did in this cycle, that means that Hune does like Penn State. He likes James Franklin, he likes Danny O'Brien, and he likes what Penn State is trying to build. And Andy Kotelnicki, of course, as well. He likes the offense and the way that it's set up. That's my point. So if Hune was willing to commit that early when he's just a kid from California, that speaks volumes. And if he stays committed, but it wouldn't surprise me one way or another if he stays in the class of 2026, because there is that opt-out in a sense. You do 1 to 2 years. It isn't working out. Somebody defeats you in the position battle. You go find another home. That's the transfer portal these days. That's where we are with college athletics. This isn't just a football thing. Or you stay, you battle, you fight, you end up defeating Peyton Falzone in a quarterback battle. Okay. But when all's said and done here, I think that Hune is going to draw some interest. I think that being a quarterback prospect from California, you're going to have to imagine that, hey, this is going to get the attention of USC, UCLA, or just some other schools on the West Coast. Who knows? Maybe Oregon. I don't know what their future quarterback situation holds. What I'm getting at, though, if there are QB needy teams that are looking for somebody that, like I said, was a consensus top 15 quarterback prospect early on in these rankings, there are going to be schools that are calling just saying, hey, we know that Penn State took another quarterback prospect over here. Is there any interest? Do you feel some type of way about it? And just kick the tires there. It's recruiting. It's going to happen. If Penn State wants to fend those schools off, we'll see. We'll see how hard Penn State pushes for it, because at the end of the day, Penn State is getting a quarterback prospect, whether that's Troy Hune, whether that's Peyton Falzone, whether it's both. They have the future quarterback locked down for the time being. We'll see if it ends up being both. You want to keep both because it just creates more certainty. You're getting Troy Hune or Peyton Falzone. You should not be complaining if you're able to get both of them into your QB room for the future, because iron sharpens iron. They're only going to compete against each other and make each other better to work harder. But you have the transfer portal there. So that's what Penn State's doing, is let's recruit all of this talent, as much talent as possible, have them develop, battle it out, and the winners stay. The guys that end up coming up short in those position battles, that think they have a better future somewhere else, the transfer portal is there, but you got to start your career here and got hopefully the right intangibles with us. I think that's the general pitch here with what Penn State's trying to do. And that's going to do it for this edition of Locked On Nittany Lions. Again, let me know your thoughts down in the comments section. Let me know if you have any questions, something that I can answer in an upcoming podcast. Love to hear your questions and what is interesting to you through this offseason. Any sport, Penn State football, wrestling, men's basketball, you name it. Thank you so much for checking out this episode. Thank you for all the support on the show. If you are new, subscribe to the YouTube channel and wherever you get your podcasts. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team every day. And again, thank you so much for making Locked On Nittany Lions your first listen and watch every single day. Now, for your second listen and watch, you got to check out Locked On NFL Draft with hosts Damian Parson and Keith Sanchez. It's draft season. NFL Draft is almost here, and they got you covered as your favorite collegiate players, your favorite former Penn State Nittany Lions. Move on to the next level. Get the latest draft rankings, the latest rumors, the latest analysis, the latest news every single day. You can find Locked On NFL Draft available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts, and it's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team every day.